Welcome to the adventure of the Vanishing Blueprint, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Consulting Detective's War. Holmes in WWI, playing in the year 1916. It is with a sense of profound duty, and no small measure of relief, that I present these accounts, long confined to the most secret archives of the War Office. Only recently have these records of my dear friend Sherlock Holmes's wartime service, meticulously documented by my own hand, been declassified. The years 1914 to 1918 plunged Europe into the Great War, a conflict wherein Holmes, at his brother Mycroft's instigation, waged a silent war of wits against the king's enemies. His battlefield was one of shadows and secrets, far from the roar of artillery, where the fate of nations often hung upon a single piece of intelligence. These are the chronicles of the Consulting Detective's War. Let us begin, then, with a most curious and vital case from that period. I shall now recount the adventure of the Vanishing Blueprint. Chapter 1. The November fog, a perennial cloak upon London, had crept into our very rooms at 221 B. Baker Street. Its chill seeped through the window frames, despite Mrs. Hudson's best efforts with the fires. I recall I was attempting to decipher a particularly dense passage in a medical journal, whilst Holmes, opposite me, was immersed in one of his peculiar chemical experiments. The acrid scent of his work intermittently overpowered the aroma of his strong shag tobacco. Our usual morning quiet was abruptly fractured by the shrill summons of the street-level bell, followed shortly by the heavy tread of Mrs. Hudson upon the stairs. A moment later, she presented a buff-colored envelope upon a salver. "A telegram, Mr. Holmes," she announced, "and the lad says it's most urgent," Mrs. Hudson answered. "Pray, place it upon the mantel, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes drawled, without looking up from his bubbling concoction. "The affairs of men can wait. The interaction of these alkaloids, however, cannot," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Despite his feigned indifference, I saw his eyes, keen and bright, flick towards the telegram. Knowing his methods, I picked it up. "It appears to be from the War Office, Holmes," I observed, noting the official stamp, remarked Dr. John Watson. At this, Holmes abandoned his chemicals with surprising alacrity, wiping his fingers upon a cloth. He snatched the flimsy paper from my hand, his brow furrowed in concentration as he scanned its contents. "Ah, Major Alastair Finch," Holmes mused, his voice dry and academic. "A man of little imagination but considerable responsibility, if memory serves. He requests our immediate presence. Once again, it seems, the nation's security teeters on the brink due to bureaucratic oversight," replied Sherlock Holmes. My interest piqued by his tone, I inquired. "What has occurred, Holmes?" commented Dr. John Watson. "Theft, Watson," Holmes declared, his eyes alight with sudden energy. "And not of the usual petty variety. Something of considerable import, judging by the urgency and the sender. Our coats, if you please. The game, as they say, is afoot, and it appears to lead us directly into the hallowed halls of Whitehall," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A quarter hour later, our hansom cab clattered to a halt before the War Office's imposing stone facade. Gone was the scholarly chaos of Baker Street. Here, the very air seemed weighted with urgency. Uniformed men strode purposefully across flagged floors, their boot heels echoing. Hushed, anxious conversations hung in the atmosphere. We were escorted through a labyrinth of corridors, the scent of floor polish and old paper heavy in our nostrils, until we reached a rather Spartan office. There, a man in major's insignia rose to greet us. His face was etched with worry, his eyes betraying a sleepless night. His voice, when he finally spoke, was strained. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank heavens you've come. Be seated, gentlemen. The matter I must discuss is of the highest confidentiality and absolutely critical to the war effort," remarked Major Alastair Finch. Holmes merely inclined his head, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in every detail from the state of the Major's desk, to the set of his jaw. Major Finch continued, his voice low and urgent. The matter concerns the Damascus Bureau, gentlemen. To be precise, the master blueprints for their new armored fighting vehicle. This machine is projected to be revolutionary, capable of breaking the current stalemate in France. These vital documents. Major Finch leaned forward then, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the strain still evident on his features. Have vanished. Taken, Mr. Holmes. Stolen from a vault that was, by all assessments, utterly impregnable. Major Alastair Finch answered. Holmes regarded the Major coolly. Impregnable, Holmes mused, his gaze unwavering as it fixed upon the Major, is a term often employed by those who underestimate the ingenuity of a determined adversary. When precisely did this lapse in security occur? Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Major Finch reported, his voice tight with anxiety. Sometime during the night, sir. The chief engineer, a Mr. Pendleton, discovered their absence upon his arrival this morning. The implications, Mr. Holmes, if these schematics fall into enemy hands, if they reach Berlin, answered Major Alastair Finch. He trailed off, the unspoken dread hanging heavy in the small office. The weight of his words settled upon us. I found myself murmuring, almost involuntarily, as I grasped the enormity of the situation. Good heavens, responded Dr. John Watson. Indeed, Watson. The stakes are high, Holmes stated, his sharp gaze turning to the Major. You will, of course, take us to this supposedly inviolable vault immediately. The true nature of a lock is only revealed by the manner in which it is picked, explained Sherlock Holmes. Major Finch nodded, a flicker of something akin to hope, or perhaps merely relief at shared responsibility, crossing his tired features. At once, Mr. Holmes, Finch agreed, a hint of renewed urgency in his tone as he rose. If you'll follow me, the security protocols are comprehensive, or so we had every reason to believe. Major Alastair Finch answered. Major Finch, his face grim and official, led us from the briefing room. The War Office corridors were a maze of polished floors and stern, numbered doors. The air smelt of beeswax and old paper. A low, persistent hum, perhaps from a distant telegraph, added to the serious mood. Captain Davies, a pale young man who looked like he hadn't slept, trailed behind. His nervous footsteps echoed ours. His voice was clipped and clear in the quiet passage. This way, gentlemen. The vault is on the lower level. It's considered utterly secure, I assure you, replied Major Alastair Finch. We descended a narrow stone staircase. The air grew cooler. We stood before a formidable steel door, covered with many locks and bolts. The office space around it was basic, with a single, empty desk. Holmes's keen eyes darted about, absorbing every detail. His expression was unreadable. Good heavens, Major, I said, looking at the huge door. That door looks truly impenetrable. One can see why it was considered secure. Dr. John Watson inquired. His voice was thin. 3 separate keys are needed, each held by a different officer. The combination lock was changed only last week. I just can't understand how it was breached, Captain Reginald Davies answered. Holmes said nothing at first. He stepped forward, took out his lens, and knelt. He examined the threshold, the door, and the floor of the small anteroom. The silence stretched, broken only by Holmes' lens scraping against metal and a distant clock's tick. Major Finch shifted impatiently, his movements rustling like dry leaves. Suddenly he straightened. His nostrils twitched slightly. Interesting. There is a scent here, faint but clear, replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes sniffed the air near the door jamb, then by the empty desk, his expression intent. He seemed to focus on one specific smell among the others in the room. A scent, Holmes? I asked, trying to smell it myself but failing. Beyond the usual smell of offices and old paper, I detect nothing unusual. What is it you found? Dr. John Watson inquired. Turkish tobacco, Watson, and quite recent. Does that suggest anything to you, Major? Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Major Finch frowned, his brow creased. Turkish? Yes, we dismissed a junior clerk, Harris, 2 weeks ago. He was very fond of those strong cigarettes. But he would have had no access, no knowledge, Major Alastair Finch replied. Captain Davies broke in, his voice a little defensive. Indeed, sir. Harris was kept to the outer mail office. He couldn't have come near this vault without permission, Captain Reginald Davies said. Holmes merely nodded. His gaze swept the room once more. Then he knelt again, this time by the hinges of the massive vault door. He took out a small vial and a camel hair brush, dabbing gently at something I could not see. The silence was tense and expectant. He rose, holding the vial to the dim light from the corridor. And this, gentlemen, is even more revealing. Tiny traces of a highly special oil. An oil, I'd bet, not usually found in the War Office, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He looked directly at Major Finch. The Major's impatient expression had changed to puzzled concern. Holmes continued, his tone sharp with the thrill of discovery. This oil, Major, is unique to the Damascus Bureau's workshops. They use it for their precision prototype machinery. Am I correct? Deduced Sherlock Holmes. Major Finch's voice was low, almost a whisper. Good heavens, Holmes, Pendleton is very particular about his oils. He says standard oils are not good enough for his delicate machines. Major Alastair Finch replied. A tense silence filled the small space. I began to understand what Holmes's discoveries meant. The Turkish tobacco scent could link to a bitter or manipulated former employee. The special oil pointed to someone with deep access right inside the Damascus Bureau's operations. Good heavens, Holmes, I exclaimed. The connections formed in my mind with alarming clarity. The dismissed clerk's Turkish tobacco and this unique oil from the Damascus Bureau. Are you suggesting a conspiracy? Perhaps the clerk was just a pawn, and the real planner has access to these special materials, responded Dr. John Watson. Your reasoning is good, Watson, but we mustn't jump to conclusions too quickly. The conclusion, however, is simple, yet significant. We are not dealing with a simple break-in by an outsider, nor just an act of betrayal from within. These two different clues clearly point to a collaboration. One person, likely able to reach the dismissed clerk or know his habits, created the way in or a distraction. The other, someone with technical skill and special access to the Damascus Bureau's resources, carried out the theft. An insider and an outsider working together. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Major Finch stared at Holmes, his usual military calm clearly shaken. Captain Davies looked like he might collapse. The news seemed to weigh us down, as heavy as the steel door of the breached vault. Our next step is clear, Holmes announced, already turning to the stairs, his energy renewed. We must visit the Damascus Bureau. I am very keen to meet Mr. Pendleton and see the place where such special knowledge, and perhaps a traitor, has come from, explained Sherlock Holmes. And so, with the mystery deepening and the shadow of treason growing, we left the Cold War office vault. Our path now led us to the men whose genius was supposed to save England, not put her in danger. The thought of meeting the irritable Mr. Pendleton, chief engineer of the new designs, filled me with both worry and excitement for the complications ahead. Following Holmes's startling deduction about the distinct clues of oil and tobacco, no time was lost. The unique lubricant pointed clearly to the Damascus Bureau, that highly secretive establishment responsible for creating modern weapons. So the next morning found us in a hansom cab, heading towards a rather grim, functional building on London's outskirts. It hummed with a hidden energy, its few windows offering little glimpse of the important work inside. The distant clang of metal and the strong scent of hot oil and coal smoke grew stronger as we approached. The oil, Watson, is our key to the Bureau's secrets. The tobacco, however, may reveal who was involved. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He spoke with his usual quiet intensity, his gaze fixed on the imposing entrance. A uniformed commissionaire let us into a plain hallway. The sounds of industry were louder here, a rhythmic thumping from deep within, and the constant, low murmur of unseen machinery. A rushed-looking clerk, his brow furrowed with worry, met us after a short wait. "We are here to see Mr. Pendleton on a matter of great urgency concerning the War Office," wondered Dr. John Watson. The clerk, whose name we learned was Davies Minor, no relation, I presumed, to the Captain Davies whose career was at risk, nodded curtly and led us down a long corridor. The air thickened with the smell of solder and an unidentifiable acrid scent. He paused before a heavy oak door. From behind it, a voice could be heard, raised in frustration. Our guide knocked timidly. "Enter, don't dawdle, man. Every second counts," remarked Mr. Pendleton. The door swung open to reveal a man of about 50, his hair a messy shock of grey, glasses perched dangerously on his nose. This was Mr. Pendleton, the chief engineer. His eyes, magnified by the lenses, darted between us, alight with fierce intelligence and deep distress. Blueprints and diagrams lay scattered across a vast desk, like fallen leaves after a storm. "Holmes, is it? And Dr. Watson, they said you were coming. A disaster, gentlemen, a complete disaster. My life's work, gone," responded Mr. Pendleton. His voice, surprisingly strong for his thin frame, was filled with real pain. He gestured wildly towards a cleared space on a nearby table. A beautifully crafted, though incomplete, scale model of a very strange armored vehicle rested there. It was unlike anything I had ever imagined, low-slung, with caterpillar tracks and an impressive-looking turret. This, gentlemen, or rather, the plans for its completion, is what has been stolen. The landship, I call her. She was to be our answer to the trenches, a steel giant to break the stalemate, proof against machine gun fire, capable of crossing any terrain. Its loss, it is as bad as treason, Mr. Pendleton replied. He paced the room, his distress clear. The rhythmic thrum of machinery from the workshops below seemed to emphasize his distress. Holmes, however, remained calm, his keen eyes taking in every detail of the room and its upset occupant. "Mr. Pendleton, your passion is understandable. Tell me, who besides yourself and the top levels of the War Office knew the true importance of these designs? And who in this bureau could access the vault where they were kept before being moved?" explained Sherlock Holmes. Pendleton stopped pacing, running a hand through his already messy hair. He listed a few trusted technicians and draftsmen, his voice tight with suspicion as he spoke each name. Holmes listened intently, making a mental note, I was sure. Access was restricted. But the oil you mentioned, the specific grade, yes, that would point to someone within these very walls, someone with workshop access. "It sickens me to think of it," answered Mr. Pendleton. "Were there any unusual visitors to the Bureau in the days before the theft? Anyone who seemed out of place or showed too much interest in areas they shouldn't have?" Sherlock Holmes noted. Pendleton frowned, then turned to a younger assistant who had been waiting nervously by the door, a lad with ink stains on his fingers and an always worried look. "Perkins, you manage the visitors' log for this section. Anyone unusual in the last week?" answered Mr. Pendleton. The young man, Perkins, swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "Only the usual War Office couriers, sir. And there was a gentleman asking about work for making precise gears. He was very insistent. Said he had an appointment, but his name wasn't on my list. I sent him away, of course," remarked Perkins. Holmes's eyes flickered with interest, though his face showed nothing. He asked for a description, which Perkins provided, though it was vague and unhelpful. After a few more questions about the Bureau's internal security, which seemed surprisingly loose in some ways despite the importance of its work, Holmes rose to leave. "Mr. Pendleton, your help has been very valuable. We have confirmed the internal link. Now, Watson, we must pursue the other end of this thread. The scent of Turkish tobacco awaits us. It is time to visit the cellars of that tobacco, replied Sherlock Holmes. As we stepped back into the echoing hallway, the sounds of the workshops fading behind us, Holmes's voice became sharp and decisive again. His words, sharp and clear, cut through the remaining gloom of the Bureau. The trail of the unique oil had led us to the heart of the operation. Now, the scent of tobacco smoke would, he hoped, lead us to the person behind this bold theft. We emerged into the grey afternoon. The chill of the War Office vault still seemed to cling to us. Along the curb, a damp wind swirled scraps of paper. The city's ceaseless hum was punctuated by the distant clang of a tram bell. Holmes, however, appeared oblivious to the cold. His mind, clearly alight, was already pursuing a new scent on the trail. The Latakia, Watson, Holmes declared, his focus absolute. A most distinctive aroma. It is quite out of place in proximity to such sensitive documents, unless its owner had recent and perhaps prolonged access. Our next inquiries must take us to the purveyors of such fine and often expensive tobaccos, explained Sherlock Holmes. And so began our tour of London's tobacconists. Our first call was to a cramped establishment near Fleet Street. Its air, thick with the scent of common shag and cheap cigars, yielded nothing of consequence. The proprietor, a portly fellow with stained fingers, merely shook his head when Holmes provided his precise description of the blend. Our second call, to a shop in a quieter, more genteel thoroughfare, proved more fruitful. The establishment itself was paneled in dark wood, its air fragrant with more exotic blends. Under the gaslight, glass jars containing tobaccos of varying hues and textures gleamed. The owner, a Mr. Abernathy, was a thin, precise man. He listened intently to my companion. A blend heavy with Syrian Latakia, Holmes detailed, his voice crisp, but with a subtle admixture of Perique and a brighter Virginia leaf. The aroma, you see, is quite particular, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Indeed, sir, Mr. Abernathy replied, his tone thoughtful as he stroked his chin. That sounds remarkably like the special mixture we prepare for a Mr. Sealer's Croft. He is a clerk at the War Office, I believe. However, I confess I've not seen him this past fortnight, Mr. Abernathy answered. Holmes's eyes gleamed at this. He conducted a swift series of inquiries with his peculiar blend of languor and intensity. These soon painted a fuller picture of Mr. Sealer's Croft. We learned he was a junior clerk, recently dismissed from his post at the War Office. Through less savory channels, we soon discovered the reason for his dismissal, an accumulation of considerable gambling debts. Dismissed, you say? Holmes mused aloud, as we later found ourselves in a hansom. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones provided a rhythmic accompaniment to his thoughts. And yet, he continued, the scent of his particular tobacco was fresh, very fresh, I should say, near the vault. Interesting indeed, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Our investigation then led us to the periphery of one of London's notorious gambling dens. Muffled shouts and the occasional clink of coin issued from the establishment sounds that spoke volumes of desperation and fleeting fortune. We did not venture inside. Instead, Holmes had arranged to meet an informant. This shadowy figure, encountered in a nearby fog-choked alley, duly confirmed Croft's ruinous habits and the crushing weight of his obligations. Croft was in deep, sir, right up to his neck, the man rasped, his voice a low growl. Ed have sold his own grand for a few quid to clear his slate, remarked informant. Back at 221B Baker Street, rain lashed the windows while a cheerful fire crackled in the grate. Holmes paced before the hearth, a lean, energetic figure against the flickering light, as he elaborated upon his theory. Consider the situation, Watson, Holmes began, his tone measured as he ticked points off on his fingers. Croft, desperate and facing dismissal, is approached. He has offered a sum sufficient to alleviate his immediate financial distress. And in return, not the blueprints themselves, for that would be far too risky for him. No, Holmes emphasized, leaning forward slightly, merely access. A duplicate key, perhaps, or it could be the sequence of changing codes to the vault. He provides this vital information before his official dismissal, thus allowing his confederates to act after he is ostensibly removed from all suspicion. Remarked Sherlock Holmes. Your theory regarding Croft's coercion seems quite sound, Holmes, I observed. I was attempting to reconcile all the disparate pieces. Yet, the matter of the tobacco still puzzles me somewhat. How does its lingering scent, so fresh as you noted, fit so precisely with his dismissal before the theft occurred? Dr. John Watson inquired. Ah, but consider this, Watson, Holmes countered gently. The thief or thieves would naturally wish to ensure their entry was clean and swift. They would likely survey the location shortly before committing the act. Perhaps Croft was even present to confirm the final details of access. It is Croft's lingering scent we detected, my dear fellow, a veritable ghost of his recent presence. He was the key, quite literally, but not, I fancy, the hand that ultimately turned it to such nefarious purpose. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The implications of Holmes's reasoning were starkly clear. Croft was merely a pawn, a weak link cleverly exploited by a far more cunning mind. The theft of the Damascus Bureau's vital blueprints was evidently not the work of a desperate clerk acting alone. Our Mr. Croft was merely the instrument, Watson, not the musician, Holmes stated, his gaze already distant, fixed on the path ahead. The true orchestrator of this affair possesses a level of sophistication suggesting circles far more elevated than those frequented by indebted clerks. Indeed, I suspect our next inquiries will inevitably lead us into the glittering, yet often treacherous, drawing rooms of Mayfair. Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes's mind ignited with the revelation of the dismissed clerk's unfortunate gambling habit. That specific Turkish tobacco scent, which had haunted the War Office vault like a ghost, now transformed from mere atmospheric detail into a damning link. A man in debt is a man susceptible, Watson, he had remarked, his grey eyes glinting as we left the tobacconist's. And desperate men frequent establishments where money flows as freely as champagne, and discretion is sold at a premium. Our next port of call, I fancy, lies in the gilded heart of Mayfair. The following evening, therefore, found us not in our familiar Baker Street rooms. Instead, we were immersed in the hushed opulence of the Griffin Club, a notorious haunt for men of influence, military contractors, and as Holmes rightly suspected, traffickers in secrets. A thick aroma of expensive cigars and fine brandy permeated the air, while a low symphony of clinking crystal and murmured conversations played beneath the ornate, coffered ceiling. Even in the guise of a country squire, a disguise Holmes had devised for me, I confess I felt a trifle conspicuous amidst such polished company. Holmes, his voice a low drawl perfectly pitched to the club's subdued atmosphere, broke the silence. Watson, your attention. By the window overlooking the park, the lady in sapphire velvet, that is Baroness Elsa von Hoffmann, observed Sherlock Holmes. My gaze followed his. Indeed, the Baroness was a striking figure. Her bearing was regal, her smile charming as she conversed with a portly gentleman whose monocle flashed intermittently in the gaslight. An undeniable magnetism emanated from her, yet beneath that veneer of social grace, I sensed a keen intelligence, a watchfulness that eerily mirrored Holmes's own. An Austrian immigré, Holmes, if I recall correctly, and her sympathies, you suspect, lie with her homeland, Dr. John Watson said. Precisely so, Watson. She cultivates connections with an artist's dedication. Observe her companions, a veritable who's who of men privy to sensitive information. Fertile waters indeed for her particular brand of fishing, Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes, demonstrating his uncanny ability to blend into any environment, steered us towards a secluded alcove, partially screened by a large potted fern. This vantage point allowed us to observe the Baroness without appearing unduly obtrusive. Around us, the murmur of voices formed a constant, indistinct hum. Presently, however, two men settled into the Chesterfield sofa just beyond our screen. Their conversation, punctuated by the general din, became intermittently audible. One voice carried a clipped military accent, the other a slight, unplaceable foreign lilt, utterly reliant on the old protocols. Young Davies, for all his supposed diligence, wouldn't know a secondary check if it bit him on the, responded military man, overheard. The other man's voice, when he replied, was softer, more sibilant. A regrettable lapse, you say, one that might prove, shall we say, advantageous for those prepared to seize an opportunity. The window, I trust, was brief, answered foreign gentleman, overheard, as a mayfly's lifespan. But long enough, my friend, long enough. Military man, overheard, answered. Again the men's voices dropped, and soon after they rose and departed, their words quickly swallowed by the club's ambient noise. For a long moment, Holmes remained motionless, his eyes narrowed in intense thought. A distant clatter, perhaps a dropped tray, followed by a hushed apology, briefly punctuated the otherwise oppressive quiet of our alcove. "Davies," explained Sherlock Holmes. He murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Captain Reginald Davies," stated Sherlock Holmes, his eyes narrowed. "The officer in charge of blueprint security. It seems his diligence, or rather his lack thereof, is a matter of some discussion," stated Sherlock Holmes. He rose. It was a subtle signal that our work here was concluded. Stepping out from the club's oppressive warmth into the cool, welcoming embrace of the Mayfair night, the rumble of a passing omnibus, a familiar London counterpoint, Holmes began to elaborate. That conversation, Watson, was far from idle gossip. Mark the phrases: a regrettable lapse, a window brief but long enough. Do you see? It speaks directly to a failure in security, a specific, exploitable moment of vulnerability, and the name so casually dropped, Captain Davies, is none other than the man entrusted with preventing precisely such a lapse. Our clerk, it seems, provided the means of entry, but another's negligence, Watson, may well have flung open the door to opportunity. I asked, startled by the grave implication. "So, Holmes, are you suggesting Captain Davies is directly involved in the theft itself?" Dr. John Watson added. Holmes's reply was sharp, cutting through the night air. Directly involved. Or perhaps, Watson, merely a pawn, his personal failings callously exploited. That, my dear fellow, is precisely what we must ascertain. Our path now leads unequivocally to Captain Reginald Davies, and I very much suspect he has a great deal to tell us, whether he intends to or not, Sherlock Holmes responded. Under the flickering gaslight, the determined set of Holmes's jaw spoke volumes. Captain Davies was about to face an interrogation unlike any he had previously, or would ever again, experience. The Mayfair connection had indeed yielded its first, most vital fruit. The November chill permeated the War Office's stone walls. We were in a sparsely furnished chamber, its air heavy with unspoken anxieties. Through a single window, persistent rain pattered mournfully against the glass in the grey courtyard. Major Finch, brow furrowed, paced the room, his heels clicking. Captain Reginald Davies sat hunched, gazing at his clasped hands. Though young, his face bore the shadows of one who had seen too much. Holmes, his voice calm yet carrying an undeniable authority that cut the room's oppressive silence, then began to speak. "We have spoken of procedures, of timetables, of locks and keys. Let us now speak of the human element, which I often find is the most fallible component in any system," stated Sherlock Holmes. Davies flinched almost imperceptibly. He raised his head. I saw a quickly masked flicker of desperation in his eyes. His voice was low and strained as he replied, I have answered all of Major Finch's questions, Mr. Holmes. I have nothing further to add. The blueprints were secure when I last checked. The protocols were followed, Captain Reginald Davies answered. Holmes leaned forward slightly, keen eyes fixed on the captain. The rhythmic drumming of rain outside underscored the tension. Indeed, and yet the plans are gone. Protocols followed is a phrase that allows for a certain latitude, does it not? A slight deviation, a momentary lapse, perhaps born not of malice, but of distraction, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes let the word hang in the air. Major Finch paused his pacing, his attention sharpening. Captain Davies swallowed hard, his composure crumbling. A faint tremor ran through his hands. His voice cracked slightly as he repeated Holmes's word. As he spoke of the war, he gestured vaguely, as if towards some unseen horror. Distraction, Captain Davies repeated, his voice cracking. Mr. Holmes, can you fathom the reality of this war? I see the casualty lists, the names. Young men, mere boys, some of them, sent to their doom, answered Captain Reginald Davies. Davies' voice grew thick with profound weariness, the sound of a spirit burdened almost beyond endurance. One thinks, one begins to question the very purpose, the cost. Does one more invention, one more terrible engine of destruction, truly justify itself when measured against the unending tide of broken lives? Major Finch moved to interrupt, but Holmes silenced him with a subtle gesture. And such thoughts, Captain, can be consuming. They can lead a man to overlook details, can they not? Particularly new details, perhaps a recently instituted measure, deemed less critical in the face of such overwhelming moral concerns, replied Sherlock Holmes. Davies looked up, eyes glistening, the fight drained from him, replaced by stark, painful honesty. Only his ragged breathing and the persistent rain broke the silence. His voice was a bare whisper as he confessed. The secondary verification, the new optical scanner for the inner vault door. It was installed only last week. A final check, an additional code to be entered after the primary locks were engaged. That night, I was preoccupied. The news from the Somme had been particularly grim. I performed the standard lockup, the one I've done 100 times, the old way. I neglected to engage the scanner system. It seemed redundant amidst everything else, answered Captain Reginald Davies. A heavy silence fell, broken by Major Finch's muttered exclamation of dismay. His voice was tight with disbelief and anger as he spoke. Neglected? Captain, that system was our very latest safeguard, answered Major Alastair Finch. Holmes, however, remained composed, his expression thoughtful rather than accusatory. A lapse, then. Understandable, perhaps, from a man wrestling with his conscience, but a critical one nonetheless. And one, I suspect, that was not merely chanced upon by some opportunistic thief, Major. Such a specific oversight concerning such a new and likely little-known system points to a more informed adversary, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes rose, the scrape of his chair signaling a shift in focus. I saw a new light in his eyes, the spark of a fresh trail. Your candor, Captain Davies, though painful, has been invaluable. It tells us that the thief knew not only what to steal, but precisely how the path might be unexpectedly cleared for them. This was no common burglar, Watson. Holmes glanced towards me, a silent communication passing. My mind immediately flew to the elegant Baroness and the hushed words we had overheard at the Mayfair Club. The theft was clearly an act of sophisticated intelligence. Major Finch, his gaze fixed on the dejected captain, listened as Holmes outlined our next move. Our next step, I believe, involves observing those who move in circles where such precise, internal knowledge might be cultivated and perhaps traded. Major, I trust Captain Davies will remain available, observed Sherlock Holmes. He will go nowhere, Mr. Holmes, rest assured, answered Major Alastair Finch. Emerging from the War Office's oppressive atmosphere, we found the rain had paused, though a somber grey sky loomed above. Holmes walked in silence, his mind visibly racing ahead. I could almost see him plotting our next move, an infiltration into a world far removed from stark military chambers. A realm of high society and subtle intrigue awaited us. The echoes of Captain Davies' troubled confession still lingered in the air of our Baker Street rooms. His admission of a momentary, yet critical, lapse in vigilance, born of a profound disillusionment with the war, had revealed a precise vulnerability. It was through this weakness that the Damascus Bureau's secrets had been plundered. Holmes, however, seemed less interested in Davies' personal crisis than in its implications for the path ahead. The scent of his strong shag tobacco, usually a sign of deep contemplation, filled the room. His voice, when he finally spoke, was brisk. It cut through the quiet hum of London traffic drifting up from the street below. The good captain's moral quandary has provided the how, Watson, but the who, and more importantly, the why, remain elusive. Our attention must now turn to the Baroness von Hoffmann. An individual of her reputed connections and sympathies cannot be ignored when such a prize is in play, explained Sherlock Holmes. And so it was that the following evening found us, not amidst the grim realities of the War Office, but within the glittering confines of Lady Albrighton's Mayfair residence. The air thrummed with sound. Vibrant strains of a string orchestra, the murmur of 100 conversations, delicate clinking of champagne flutes. It was a world away from the trenches, yet Holmes moved through it with the same focused intensity he would bring to the scene of a crime. We soon located the Baroness. She was, as described, a striking woman, her dark hair elegantly coiffed, her gown a whisper of expensive silk. She held court near a large marble fireplace, its mantelpiece adorned with hothouse flowers. Their perfume mingled with the scent of beeswax and old money. Her laughter, a low, melodious sound, carried easily above the general din. Lady Albrighton, our hostess, a woman of considerable charm and even more considerable connections, swept past us with a rustle of silk. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, so glad you could attend. The Baroness is holding quite the salon tonight, isn't she?" replied Lady Albrighton. She gestured vaguely towards von Hoffmann before being drawn into another conversation. Holmes merely inclined his head, his gaze already returning to the Baroness. He then spoke in a low undertone, his gaze fixed upon her. "Observe her companions, Watson, not merely the attachés and minor diplomats one might expect. See there, Lord Ashworth, a known advocate for, shall we say, negotiated settlements, and beside him Miss Penrose, whose pamphlets on the futility of conflict are causing such a stir in certain circles," stated Sherlock Holmes. I watched as the Baroness engaged each in turn, her expression animated, her gestures graceful. There was an intensity to her discourse, yet it seemed less the furtive exchange of a spy and more the earnest debate of a salonier. She seemed to absorb information, listening with a profound attentiveness that drew people to her. The sounds of the party, the distant call for a carriage from the street, all faded as I focused on her interactions. "She is not merely a conduit for Austrian intelligence, Watson," Holmes murmured, his eyes alight. "Her network is broader, its purpose more nuanced. She collects not state secrets but perspectives. She maps the currents of dissent, of war weariness, of those seeking alternatives to this carnage," deduced Sherlock Holmes. My companion then drew my attention to a brief, almost imperceptible exchange. The Baroness, momentarily disengaged from her circle, was approached by a quiet, unassuming man I did not recognize. He passed her a small, folded note. This was not done with the air of a clandestine operative, but with the solemnity of one delivering an important, albeit discreet, message. She accepted it with a grave nod, her smile briefly vanishing before tucking it into her reticule. The man then melted back into the crowd. The entire transaction lasted but a few seconds, almost lost against the backdrop of a particularly lively waltz tune. Holmes's voice held a new note of conviction. That man, Watson, is secretary to a prominent neutral ambassador with strong pacifist leanings. The Baroness's game is far deeper than simple espionage. She is not striving to arm Austria, but perhaps to disarm the very concept of this escalating war. Her allegiance, I fancy, is not to a flag, but to an ideal, however misguided or dangerous that ideal might prove in wartime, stated Sherlock Holmes. As we made our departure, the chill night air was a welcome contrast to the heated ballroom. The rhythmic clatter of our hansom's hooves on the cobblestones seemed to beat a path towards a new understanding. The vanishing blueprint was not merely a piece of stolen technology. It was a symbol. The Baroness, I now understood, was but one player in a far more intricate design. Holmes broke the silence as our hansom clattered through the London streets, his tone decisive. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall pay a visit to Major Finch. I suspect the true nature of these stolen plans, and the motivations behind their theft are far more complex than the War Office imagines. It is time to explore the possibility that the blueprints themselves hold a secret beyond their schematics. The chill of the morning had not yet lifted as Holmes and I alighted from our hansom before the imposing stone facade of the Damascus Bureau. I confess, a knot of apprehension tightened within me. This place, a veritable fortress of secrets, felt different from our usual haunts. A palpable sense of urgency seemed to emanate from the very bricks, a stark contrast to the measured calm Holmes displayed. Our previous discoveries concerning Baroness von Hoffmann had clearly galvanized his thoughts, leading us directly to this hub of military innovation, and I could only wonder what new complexities awaited us. Major Alastair Finch received us in his sparsely furnished office. The rhythmic tick-tock of a large wall clock seemed to amplify the strained silence. His face, already etched with worry, tightened further upon seeing my companion, and I could not help but feel a degree of sympathy for the burden he clearly carried. His voice was clipped official. "Mr. Holmes, to what do I owe this early visit? I trust you have substantive progress to report, not more theories," said Major Alastair Finch. Holmes met his gaze evenly. "Major, the theft of the Damascus blueprints is more than simple espionage. It appears to be a calculated misdirection. I believe the documents stolen were exactly what the thief, or rather, the one controlling them, was meant to obtain," remarked Sherlock Holmes. A faint metallic clang echoed from a distant workshop, a reminder of the vital work conducted here. Finch's eyebrows shot up, his incredulity plain. I, too, found myself taken aback by Holmes's assertion. It seemed a most audacious theory, yet I knew better than to dismiss his pronouncements lightly. "Intended. Mr. Holmes, these are plans vital to our war effort. Are you suggesting some elaborate game is afoot, with national security as the stakes?" His tone was rapidly losing its veneer of military decorum, rising in pitch. Major Alastair Finch replied, "A game with deadly serious consequences, Major, and one in which we have been played until now. The Baroness von Hoffmann, for instance, is not the straightforward agent provocateur one might assume," explained Sherlock Holmes. Finch slammed a hand upon his desk, the sound sharp in the confined space. Papers rustled in protest. The Major's patience, I observed, was wearing dangerously thin, and I braced myself for an explosion. He spoke with considerable heat. "The Baroness. I have had my fill of your inferences regarding Austrian sympathizers and society hostesses. We are discussing tangible assets, stolen from under our noses. I require facts, Holmes, not spectral connections," replied Major Alastair Finch. Before Holmes could retort, the office door was thrust open with some force, and Mr. Pendleton, the chief engineer, strode in. His white hair was disheveled, and his eyes burned with a familiar, fiery impatience. Another formidable personality to contend with, I thought, though perhaps his expertise might shed some light where officialdom could not. His voice was a gravelly rumble. "Finch, what is this commotion? My work is being disturbed by raised voices. And Holmes, are you still meddling where you're not wanted?" Mr. Pendleton said. "Mr. Pendleton," Holmes interjected, his voice a blade of calm slicing through the tension. "Your arrival couldn't be more timely. The Mark IVS transmission schematics, they contained an odd alteration to the gearing ratio, did they not? Something that seemed ill-suited for prolonged combat conditions," explained Sherlock Holmes. Pendleton blinked, his irascible demeanor momentarily faltering. He tugged at his collar, a low hum of machinery from the building's depths suddenly more noticeable in the brief silence. I leaned forward slightly, sensing that Holmes was on the verge of a significant point. He grumbled, "A slight adjustment, yes, for specific terrain adaptability. A classified refinement," Mr. Pendleton replied. "A refinement, Mr. Pendleton, or a deliberately engineered weakness?" Holmes's eyes glinted. "A flaw so subtle it might be missed at first glance, yet so critical it would cause the machine to break down completely after heavy use, perhaps after 50 miles, if an enemy built it using those stolen plans," Sherlock Holmes noted. The color drained from Major Finch's face. Pendleton, however, drew himself up, a flicker of something akin to grim pride in his gaze. A startling thought began to dawn in my own mind, a possibility so audacious it was almost unthinkable. His voice was low but firm. "A contingency. My designs would not aid the Kaiser, Holmes. Not truly," Mr. Pendleton replied. "Precisely," Holmes affirmed, a rare note of approval in his tone. "So, the stolen blueprints are not a loss, Major Finch. They are a poisoned chalice, a brilliant act of counterintelligence intended to sabotage the enemy if they try to build the Damascus vehicle from those plans," explained Sherlock Holmes. My jaw dropped as I gaped at Holmes, the case transforming before my very eyes. Major Finch collapsed into his chair, rendered mute by the revelation. In the silence that followed, the clock's tick-tock boomed like cannon fire. "And now, gentlemen," Holmes continued, his voice brisk and purposeful, "our task is clear. These deliberately flawed plans are undoubtedly en route to Berlin. We must ensure they reach their intended destination, but under our terms, and understand precisely who is carrying them, and by what means," Sherlock Holmes responded. He paused, his gaze already distant, as if peering across the grey waters of the channel itself. The game, as he termed it, had indeed entered a new, more perilous phase. I felt a familiar mixture of trepidation and admiration for my friend, who navigated these treacherous currents with such unnerving composure. The revelation of the blueprints as a Trojan horse, a deception to cripple the German war machine, still filled the Damascus Bureau. Major Finch, face a mask of dawning comprehension, stared at Holmes. But Holmes, ever decisive when the path was clear, wasted no moment on past surprises. His voice, sharp and decisive, cut through the stunned silence. "Gentlemen, the game has changed. Our immediate task is no longer mere recovery, but interception. The courier carrying these plans believes them to be genuine, a prize of incalculable worth. They will make for Germany with all speed," declared Sherlock Holmes. "Blast it, Holmes. If that's the truth of it, then every port, every patrol. We must move immediately," replied Major Alastair Finch. Major Finch declared, his tone regaining some of its customary urgency, though tinged with a new uncertainty. "Too broad, Major, and too slow. Our quarry will not choose a route inviting scrutiny. They will seek the swiftest, most direct passage to a point from which the German High Command can be rapidly accessed. Consider the timing of the theft, the desperation it implies. They will aim for the Dover-Calais crossing," Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes countered, his eyes already distant, fixed upon some inner map. He paced briefly, lean frame taut. I could almost hear his formidable intellect whirring as he pieced together the thief's desperate calculus. "But why Calais specifically, Holmes?" responded Dr. John Watson. I ventured, leaning forward eagerly to follow his reasoning. "Elementary, my dear Watson. It is the shortest sea route, frequented by numerous small, swift vessels less likely to attract undue attention than the larger channel ferries. Our thief, burdened with what they believe to be the war's greatest secret, will value speed and anonymity above all. They will avoid the longer, more heavily patrolled routes to neutral territories. No, it will be a dash across the straits, a quick transfer, and then onwards. We must be at Dover within the hour," replied Sherlock Holmes. No argument was possible. A flurry of activity erupted. Within minutes, a fast motorcar had been procured. Soon, we were racing through the Kentish countryside, the engine's powerful roar a counterpoint to the anxious thumping of my own heart. The air grew cooler, tinged with salt, as we neared the coast. Dover emerged before us, its buildings clinging to the iconic white cliffs, the harbor a scene of bustling activity. Gulls cried overhead, their calls mingling with the mournful sound of a distant ship's horn. Holmes, his gaze sweeping the vessels, suddenly stiffened. He pointed to a small, grimy steam launch, smoke curling from its funnel. "There, Watson, the Sea Serpent, known for its speed and its captain's flexible regard for cargo regulations. Our man, or I am much mistaken, is aboard or about to be," Sherlock Holmes noted. Major Finch, with commendable swiftness, commandeered a Royal Navy patrol boat. Its young officer, Lieutenant Davies, listened to Holmes's terse explanation, his jaw set grimly. Without a word of protest, he issued orders with a clipped naval professionalism that spoke of wartime readiness. Moments later, our vessel's powerful engines throbbed to life, and we surged from the harbor, cold spray stinging our faces. The choppy, gray expanse of the channel stretched before us, the Sea Serpent already a diminishing smudge on the horizon. "Full speed, Lieutenant. We cannot afford to lose them now," Holmes urged, his voice barely audible above the engine's roar and the lash of the wind. The chase was on. Our patrol boat surged forward, its powerful engines thrumming beneath us. Salt spray stung our faces as we cut through the waves, the gray, unforgiving sky stretching endlessly above. It was a grimly exhilarating pursuit. I could make out agitated figures on the Sea Serpent's deck, looking back towards us with evident alarm. Holmes stood at the prow, unmoving as a statue, his hawk-like gaze fixed unblinkingly upon our quarry. "They are making for French waters, Holmes," Dr. John Watson added. I shouted over the din. He nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. "Precisely as anticipated, Watson. And from Calais, I surmise their destination is not Berlin, not immediately. No, for plans of this magnitude, believed to be genuine, they will seek the quickest route to operational assessment directly to the crucible of this war. The Western Front itself awaits," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. His words, clear despite the tumult, painted a stark picture. Our desperate channel chase was but a prelude to a more perilous stage. A confrontation in the trenches these flawed blueprints were designed to overcome. The gray, choppy waters of the channel, so recently the scene of our desperate pursuit, gave way to the ravaged landscape of northern France. Our arrival at the Western Front was heralded not by fanfare, but by the distant, percussive symphony of artillery, a sound that vibrated through the very floorboards of the staff car, conveying us towards the line. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth, smoke, and something acrid I knew all too well from my own service days. Holmes, who had been unnervingly silent since we made landfall, finally spoke as we were escorted towards a sandbagged command dugout. His voice was low, yet it cut through the muted roar of the guns. "Observe, Watson. These blueprints, brought to the very teeth of the conflict, tell us much. This is no mere transfer, but a direct delivery for immediate assessment by a high-value asset. "Time, my dear fellow, is of the essence," replied Sherlock Holmes. A harassed-looking major, his face etched with fatigue, greeted us with a curt nod. The ground beneath our boots was a mire of mud and duckboards, and the constant thrum of activity, punctuated by the sharp crack of rifles, was a grim chorus. No ordinary courier would risk this inferno, Major, nor would they entrust such vital intelligence to a common soldier. We are seeking an individual deeply embedded, someone with the authority and technical acumen to verify these plans swiftly on the spot and relay their import without delay to the highest echelons of German command. The enemy's intention is clear: rapid verification and immediate dissemination. We must act with commensurate speed, for time is our most formidable adversary here, stated Sherlock Holmes. The Major, clearly skeptical of civilian involvement, yet under orders to cooperate, merely grunted and gestured towards a communication trench. As we picked our way through the narrow, muddy passage, the reality of this brutal war pressed in. Soldiers, their faces grimy and their eyes hollow, huddled in dugouts, their hushed conversations barely audible above the general cacophony. The air was heavy, and the occasional whine of a shell passing overhead made even my seasoned nerves twitch. Holmes absorbed the chaos with an almost unnatural calm. His keen eyes darted from the troops' disposition to their equipment, even to the set of their jaws. As we passed a listening post, he paused. A young signaller hunched there, brow furrowed in concentration over his crackling apparatus. My friend soon found an opportunity to exchange a few quiet words with a weary captain we encountered. The captain confirmed the intense enemy efforts to gain any sliver of intelligence regarding new allied technologies. He spoke of desperate, almost suicidal enemy patrols and the constant probing of their lines. "They're like starving wolves, sir, snapping at anything that might give them an edge. We intercepted a message fragment only yesterday, something about final verification and immediate strategic value. Seemed unusually agitated, even for them," Captain answered. Holmes listened intently, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the enemy lines. The captain's words, particularly immediate strategic value, seemed to electrify him. A faint smile touched his lips, but it was the flicker of urgent understanding in his eyes that I had come to recognize as the precursor to a breakthrough under immense pressure. "Starving indeed, Captain, and when men are desperate, they are often less discerning about the quality of the meal placed before them, provided it is served with sufficient urgency and conviction," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He turned to me then, his expression now animated. The grim surroundings seemed to fade as his mind raced ahead. "This is not merely about stopping a leak, Watson, though that remains our paramount and most time-critical objective. We must recover those plans before they can be fully exploited. Yet it is also about understanding the enemy's profound hunger, their operational desperation. This insight, this raw view of their necessities, will be crucial. The stage is set not just for recovery, but perhaps for something more if we can act decisively enough," Sherlock Holmes responded. I confess, his words then were somewhat opaque, but the intensity in his voice was unmistakable. He had gleaned something vital from the mud and horror of the trenches, a piece of the puzzle that had eluded us in the corridors of Whitehall. The hunt was far from over. Indeed, it felt as though we were only now approaching its most perilous, time-sensitive, and revealing phase, where every passing moment counted against us. The grim realities of the Western Front, its cacophony and chilling silences, still echoed in my mind as our train rattled back towards London, the rhythmic clatter a stark contrast to the horrors we'd witnessed. Holmes, however, seemed to have shed the grimness of the trenches like a worn coat, his eyes alight with the cold fire of imminent discovery. We were conveyed with all speed to the War Office. Within its hallowed yet anxious halls, the air itself seemed thick with unspoken fears, and the faint, metallic scent of officialdom. The distant, rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the main hall, a sound I recalled from previous visits, was the only clear sound to break the oppressive quiet, save for the hushed rustle of papers from unseen offices as we were ushered into a familiar, paneled room. His voice cracked with the strain of sleepless nights. "Holmes, thank heavens you're here," he swallowed hard. Have you made any progress? The pressure from above, it's becoming unbearable," Major Alistair Finch said. He offered a curt nod, his gaze sweeping the room. "Progress, Major, and I believe a conclusion. I have taken the liberty of requesting the presence of Captain Davies, Baroness von Hoffmann, and Mr. Pendleton. They should be arriving presently," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Indeed, as he spoke, the door opened to admit the individuals in question. Captain Davies appeared pale and drawn, his uniform immaculate but his eyes haunted. The Baroness von Hoffmann retained her poise, though a certain watchfulness in her expression was undeniable. Mr. Pendleton, the irascible engineer, entered with a brusque energy, his brow furrowed. The heavy oak door clicked, shut behind them, with a sound of finality. His tone was calm, yet carried an undeniable authority that silenced any incipient protest. "Pray be seated. We have a rather intricate web to untangle," declared Sherlock Holmes. He paused, his eyes resting momentarily on each of them. The scrape of a chair leg on the polished floor was unnaturally loud in the ensuing silence as they settled. Major Finch shifted, the leather of his Sam Brown belt creaking softly. "Let us begin with the initial breach, the unfortunate, dismissed clerk, Mr. Sowerby." The name seemed to hang in the air for a moment. His weakness for a particular blend of shag tobacco, a blend, Baroness. He inclined his head towards her. "You were known to procure for certain associates was his undoing. He provided the initial, shall we say, vulnerability," Sherlock Holmes noted. The Baroness inclined her head slightly, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on her lips, but she offered no denial. A draft from beneath the window caused a loose paper on Finch's desk to rustle softly. "However," Holmes continued, his gaze shifting pointedly to Captain Davies, whose pallor seemed to increase under the scrutiny, "Sowerby merely opened a door. It was your lapse, Captain, born of a profound disillusionment with the very war these blueprints were meant to influence. A disillusionment, I surmise, deepened by the relentless slaughter you witnessed on the Western Front, Captain. A weariness of the soul that made the very concept of victory a hollow sound," Sherlock Holmes said. Davies flinched as if struck, his face a mask of anguish. I saw in his eyes not just fear, but the haunted look of a man who had stared too long into the abyss of the trenches, a man whose spirit had been eroded by the ceaseless barrage and the cries of the wounded. His breath hitched, a ragged, painful sound quickly suppressed. From outside, the distant clatter of a horse-drawn wagon on the cobbles briefly intruded, a mundane sound from a world far removed from his private hell. "An agent," Holmes pressed on, his voice unwavering, "who left a most singular trace, a smear of highly specialized lubricant oil, peculiar to the precision machinery used within the Damascus Bureau itself," explained Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Pendleton started, his face flushing a deep red. The sound was almost a snort of indignation. His voice was a low growl. "Preposterous. My bureau is secure," Mr. Pendleton answered. Holmes raised a hand, his voice cutting through Pendleton's protest smoothly, the gesture silencing the engineer more effectively than any shout. "Secure, perhaps, Mr. Pendleton, but not impervious to an individual with intimate knowledge of its workings and access to its materials," Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes's eyes flickered towards the Baroness, then back to Pendleton, a silent implication passing between them. The air in the room grew colder, or so it seemed to me. "Someone, I suggest, with a grievance or a misplaced loyalty, cleverly exploited by the Baroness's far-reaching network," deduced Sherlock Holmes. Captain Davies looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumped. The Baroness, however, met Holmes's gaze directly, her expression unreadable. Her voice was like chilled wine, smooth and sophisticated. An elaborate construction, Mr. Holmes, worthy of the stage. But here, in the rather more prosaic confines of the War Office, one looks for substance, not merely artful insinuation. Baroness Elsa von Hoffmann answered. A thin smile touched Holmes's lips. Not supposition, Baroness, but deduction. For the most crucial thread in this tapestry is the nature of the blueprints themselves. They were flawed, were they not? He paused, letting the question hang. Deliberately so, Sherlock Holmes noted. A collective gasp, quickly stifled, went around the room. Major Finch stared, aghast. Even the Baroness's composure seemed to flicker for an instant, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening on the armrest of her chair, the leather groaning faintly. A masterful piece of counterintelligence, Holmes elaborated, his voice precise. By certain elements within our own services, designed to mislead the enemy should they fall into their hands. Your agents, Baroness, stole precisely what they were meant to steal, declared Sherlock Holmes. Good heavens, Holmes, you mean to say this entire affair, this theft, was a deliberate deception orchestrated by our own side? Dr. John Watson added. A stunned silence descended, heavy as a fog. Then came Major Finch's sharp intake of breath, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Captain Davies, who had been studying his hands, finally raised his head. In his tired eyes, a flicker of understanding dawned, chased closely by what might have been relief. He stammered slightly, flawed. Then the real designs, responded Major Alistair Finch. His voice was crisp, cutting through the lingering shock. The genuine blueprints, Major, the ones that will indeed break the stalemate, were never truly at risk of falling into enemy hands through this particular charade. Sherlock Holmes responded. Major Finch visibly sagged with relief, a whispered, "Thank God," escaping his lips, almost inaudible. The grandfather clock in the hall seemed to tick louder in the sudden release of one kind of tension, only to be replaced by another. The Baroness's network, Holmes continued, his gaze now fixed on the woman herself, whilst genuinely seeking to acquire vital intelligence, was cleverly guided towards a baited trap. The Baroness's lips thinned, but she met his stare coolly. A carriage rumbled past on the street outside, its wheels on the damp pavement a momentary distraction. Captain Davies' complicity, he went on, his tone softening almost imperceptibly as he addressed the broken officer, born of his crisis of conscience, where the weight of endless casualties perhaps led you to question the very instruments of war, even those designed by our own side. This merely facilitated the exchange of these misleading documents. Sherlock Holmes said. I couldn't bear it, Holmes. The endless lists of the dead, the wounded, I thought. If the new weapon was delayed, perhaps even discredited, it might force them to talk, to find another way. It was madness. I see that now, said Captain Davies. He looked down, his shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly. The confession, raw and painful, seemed to drain the last of his resistance. A dawning comprehension of the larger game, he'd been unwittingly part of Ward, with the profound shame on his face. He nodded slowly, a single, jerky movement, as if acknowledging a truth he had long wrestled with in the darkest hours. The clerk, Sowerby, was a pawn, his weakness exploited. The oil trace, a carefully laid breadcrumb leading back to the controlled leak within the Damascus Bureau, all to ensure the entire subterfuge appeared utterly authentic to your principles, Baroness. Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes rose, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco now mingling with the stale air of the office. The tension in the room had subtly shifted, the focus no longer on loss, but on a complex, dangerous game now laid bare. The game, however, is not entirely concluded. While the enemy possesses useless information, the actual blueprints, Mr. Pendleton's true genius, must still be formally accounted for and secured beyond any shadow of a doubt. And that, gentlemen and Baroness, is our immediate next concern, explained Sherlock Holmes. The chill of the War Office corridors seemed to have receded, replaced by a palpable air of relief. Before us, upon a polished mahogany table, lay the recovered schematics, the genuine blueprints for Mr. Pendleton's formidable armored engine. Major Finch, his usually taut features softened, stood beside it, the weight of recent anxieties visibly lifted from his shoulders. The rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the outer hall was the only sound to break the stillness for a moment. His voice, when he spoke, was imbued with a profound gratitude. "Thanks to you, Holmes, they are secure. The arrests have been made. Baroness von Hoffmann is in custody, her network dismantled. And Captain Davies, well, his motivations were complex, but the law must take its course," said Major Alastair Finch. Mr. Pendleton, who had been hovering nearby, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, stepped forward. His gaze upon the blueprints was one of almost paternal reverence, though a flicker of something more troubled crossed his countenance as he absorbed the Major's words. The stiff rustle of the papers was audible as he gently touched their edge. He cleared his throat, his tone a mixture of triumph and a curious solemnity. "It is a momentous relief. This engine, gentlemen, it will change everything. It must," responded Mr. Pendleton. With the immediate crisis averted and the blueprints secured, we took our leave of the War Office. The journey back to Baker Street was a quiet one, the weight of the day's events and the implications of Pendleton's invention settling upon us both. Later that evening, we returned to Baker Street. The familiar fog enveloped us like a comforting shroud. Outside, a brisk November wind rattled the window panes, carrying the distant cries of newsboys. Holmes settled into his armchair, the firelight playing upon his features. His usual post-case animation was conspicuously absent as he stared into the flames, long fingers steepled before him. His voice, when he finally broke the silence, was low and reflective. "So, Watson, the behemoth is unleashed, or soon will be. Progress, they call it," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. There was a weariness in his manner that I had seldom witnessed. The case was solved, the nation's security bolstered, yet an undeniable shadow lingered. "But surely, Holmes," I ventured, "it is a necessary evil, a means to end this dreadful slaughter in the trenches," Dr. John Watson replied. He shifted his gaze from the fire to me, his eyes holding a deep, searching quality. "Pendleton's creation, Watson," observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes began, his voice low, "is a marvel of destructive ingenuity. It may well break the stalemate, as he fervently hopes," Sherlock Holmes said. He paused, his gaze distant. "But at what cost? Each advancement in warfare, however necessary it may seem, merely paves the way for more sophisticated means of annihilation," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Another pause. "We celebrate the recovery of these plans, yet we stand upon the precipice of an era where such engines will reshape not only battlefields, but nations, and indeed the very soul of man," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused, and the only sound was the crackle of the coals in the grate and the distant, mournful hoot of a steamer on the Thames. The victory, hard won as it was, felt undeniably bittersweet. Captain Davies, disillusioned by the horrors he witnessed, sought to hinder this particular advance, albeit misguidedly. The Baroness, driven by loyalty to her own land, sought to exploit it, Sherlock Holmes said. He leaned back further into his armchair, his gaze returning to the dancing flames, as if seeking answers or perhaps solace within their fiery depths. Each, in their own fashion, grappled with the implications of this new age of conflict. The price of progress, Watson, is often far greater than the initial sum, a debt that accumulates with every supposed triumph, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I could offer no easy rebuttal. The complexities of the case, the moral ambiguities laid bare, left little room for simple pronouncements. As the embers in the fireplace glowed, casting long shadows across our familiar room, it seemed that while one adventure had concluded, the questions it raised would resonate for a long time to come. The great game, it appeared, had acquired a yet more terrible dimension.